I want to try to make this kind of fun conversation and really talk about just what the title says, where it all started. I'm blessed to be from Philadelphia, especially when it comes to the Order of the Arrow and be a part of the first lodge in the nation where it all began. So a little bit about me. I know a bunch of you guys know me for a while, but some don't. So this is me way back when. Actually had a lot of hair at one point, as most of us did. So I had the good fortune of being inducted at Treasure Island. Did my Ordeal Brotherhood and Vigil, all at the birthplace of the order. Was a lodge chief, section chief as an adult. Spent almost 2 decades on the National Order of the Arrow Committee. Still involved today on various things. One of my biggest volunteer jobs is the Cradle Liberty Council president, and like everybody else, Eagle Scout, Vigil Honor member, and one or two other cool things along the way. Um, so I think everybody has something that really got them going. And I think, as a kid, I went to 81 Jamboree as a visitor, and that's when I really was exposed to patch trading other than seeing it at camp. That was the year I got inducted into the OA. And I probably did some small minimal trading at that time, but it wasn't really until the 75th anniversary of the Order of Yarrow. We had a big celebration at Treasure Island that summer, and in the Unami Lodge House was the Unami Museum. And just like I have on that bullet point, I found it was really interesting that, everybody had something, but nobody had everything. And at that point, I don't know that anybody even knew what everything was, because in 1990, things were still evolving, still being, even though we were 75 years into it, things were still being found and discovered for the first times. But that's really the kind of what upped my game in terms of collecting. And that really gave me a goal that, I want to be that guy that next time it comes for a big anniversary celebration, want to be the guy that has everything. And even though I didn't quite know what everything meant at that time, but we did have color copiers at that time, so through help with lots of friends and was able to get color copies of some of the issues that I didn't have. And then it began the search to try to figure out how I'm going to find things. So kind of similar to probably a lot of people on here, I wrote letters to past chiefs and older members who were still living. Now, again, to us, older members were inducted in the teens and the 20s. This was already 1990. So unfortunately, a lot of them that were gone at that time. I ran ads in the wanted to buy in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Many of you might know Paul Muncher, another collector from Pennsylvania. So Paul was probably the first guy in there, and but I started running ads. My mom was really great at learning the questions to ask, because most of the time people would call, I wouldn't be home, but she would take some good notes for me so that I could return the calls when I'd get back. I think the other thing that really helped me significantly was just building relationships with some of our older members that were still around. Being a past chief, I had the opportunity to, meet many of the guys that were still there. In fact, I meant to put a picture in here of the dinner when I got inducted. And when we look at the picture of all the past lodge chiefs, there's probably, 5 different vigil sashes represented in that picture, which was really, really cool. So some of them were still around at that time. I got really lucky. My first letter, or I should say my first response that I got came from a guy, old timer named Graham Park. And this was in probably 1992. And you figure at that point, Graham was inducted in 1928. So he was probably uh, 16 at that time. So he was around 80 almost at the time. But he lived about 10 minutes from the jewelry store I was working at, and popped in to visit one time and said, hey, I got your letter, and I don't have this, I don't have that tribe one, but I do have that white canvas one, as he called it, which of course the top picture there, the famous, white twill, call it the R1 or the R2, depending on what you like to call it. And he said, well, let me know when you want to come over after work one day. And of course, you can probably all imagine the response that I had was like, well, I get done in about 10 minutes if that's good. And he said, well, that's not going to work because, my wife and I have something going on, but we agreed that I would go over on Saturday after work because the store closed. And, I was excited to be welcomed into his house. And he had this old school photo album, which was kind of like you could fit three pictures in it, and but that's what he had, patches, three pictures lengthwise and probably 25 pages. So that was where he had his patches at the time. So, he pulls that out and says, here, look through. And I got to the page where the white twill was, and I thought, well, yeah, that's definitely the one. And he says, okay, well, pull it out of the book. Okay, so I still have no idea how this is going to go. And then I can see several pages later, just the tail of that turtle was sticking out of a page. And I was flipping with anticipation because I'm feeling like I've got some turtles, but I don't have one that looks like that. And I get to the page and there happen to be two of them in that same sleeve. And I said, well, geez, Graham, I don't have that either. And he says, okay, pull it out. So then, we look through the rest of the stuff, which was not anything super exciting. And we're just talking a little more. And he says, okay, those are the two that you want right now. For those of you who don't know, the white round twill really came out, we figure around 1927, 1928. And the same thing with the turtle, felt, unfelt, unfelt. So it's felt W's, not like the later embroidered W's. And I said, well, geez, Graham, like what can I give you for these? Do you want money? Do you want to trade patches for them? Or, I would love to add them to my collection. And this was a really kind of eye-opening experience because he stood up quickly and he put his hand out and he said, I want two things from you. And I said, okay. He said, a handshake to say thank you and a promise that if you ever get tired of these patches, that you're not going to sell them, you're going to give them to somebody else who will care about them. And that was really kind of the first killer issues of Unami that I was able to pick up. And then I thought, wow, this is going to be great. I sent out 20 letters. If everybody has two patches, that will be great. And of course, as we know, that's not exactly how it worked, but was off to a very good start. Now, the interesting thing, in lots of early pictures, we can see that white twill being worn on the uniforms. The turtles, if people wore them, they wore them on sweatshirts. They actually wore them on swimsuits, if you can imagine that. And that helped explain why not as many of these actually survived. So that was my start, from letter responses. And then all of a sudden we get a call, and my mom says, this person said her dad was on Treasure Island in the late teens and the early 20s. I'm like, whoa, you got my attention. So I went over to their house, spent a bunch of time, and they had a couple Treasure Island felt patches. They had a square merit badge sash, and they had this felt arrow in here, which I had no idea what it was. But of course, if you're from Unami and this is coming with early Unami and Treasure Island things, you're going to keep it with it. As it turned out, I found out probably maybe 9 to 12 months later, I was at a troop's anniversary celebration, and there was our 1975 lodge chief, a friend named Phil Hittner, was displaying this patch board that he had, and lo and behold, there is that felt arrow along with a felt W. So Phil had met with a guy named Bert Lacey, who was one of the earliest inductees, and Bert actually helped build the Unami Lodge house on Treasure Island the first time around. And Bert had documented on a paper that both that W and that felt arrow were used to signify membership in the Wimakten Dink circa 1921. So we really would say that those were kind of the earliest, certainly the earliest Unami pieces that were out there. And now I've felt great because this felt arrow that had been sitting lonely in a box for a while, I finally knew what that was. And that was really, really cool about that. So, these were two other things. The patch on the right, Treasure Island Life Saving Corps, 1921. And then to the left is one of the earliest totem pins. And unfortunately, at that time, I was a young kid starting out in working in the jewelry business and didn't have a lot of money. So opportunity came that I had a good friend that also collected these things. And the good news is I know where they're at today, and I'm hopeful one day they may come back to me. But these were some of the earliest things. These all came together with that felt arrow, which was just really, really cool. You can't talk about good issues from Unami Lodge without talking about the Unami tribe patch. Some of you may know, but for those who don't, 1935, the Grand Lodge decided that lodges were going to become tribes instead of lodges. So for just 1 year, if I were to flip over those bylaws, you would see that they were adopted in either August or October of 1935. And when I say at the top, even when it's bad timing, you find a way. In the spring of 1994, I had just opened my jewelry store, and I have a friend who came to visit and said, "Hey, I got a patch that you need." And of course, it was this Unami tribe patch, which is one of our, I would have to say, of all the rounds issued in the lodge, that's much tougher than the white twill. And of course, I was broke. I had a lot of jewelry in my cases in front of me, but I was cash poor. But I was able to scrape some funds together and borrow money from a friend to buy this patch. And I'm really glad I never looked back. So the cool part is, I would probably say that the membership card Unami Tribe is rarer than the patch itself. So these three pieces didn't come together, but I was happily able to, marry them together not too much longer after getting the tribe, which is really, really cool. So, um, we did not issue our first, even though we began in 1915, we did not issue our first lodge flap until 1958. So the Unami F1, didn't come around for a long time. People wore turtles, people wore round patches on their pockets. And what I found, I showed you earlier the first turtle that I got, and then these are just some of the earlier ones, those top two that are very misshapen. Certainly these were not mass produced and very individualized. It's hard to say that some of them are different issues because they're just different varieties. The color green may be different. The size of the W's may be different. This next one here, I mean, some of these came out during the war times, which made them even harder because, so many of our members were leaving and going to battle in the wars. So the one on the bottom gets confused a lot of time because that patch with embroidered W's was used for probably 10 or 15 years, but these are all felt W's on there, which really um, date to the early to like the late 30s to the very early 1944, 45, 46 maximum. So super cool. And almost every time that I find one of these, it's different. And so what do you think I do? Do I trade it away or do I keep it, right? I keep it like most people, even so I probably have those top two, I probably have six different ones that are all slightly different. Um, One of the coolest things, I did trade away or sell that earlier totem pin that I had, but I have been blessed to be able to find a lot of good ones. So J.E. Caldwell, which was a jeweler in Philadelphia, was the official jeweler of the Order of the Arrow. So a lot of the early pins came from J.E. Caldwell. Many came from Hood as well. You'll see some have the visual triangle on them, some don't, some have a chain, some don't. Probably the coolest piece is that tie bar in the center, which actually was sold in the Lodge Trading Post at one point, although we can't imagine that there were very many. And the guy that came from kept his vigil in 1955, and he told the story that that was the one and only one that had been in the trading post, and he was able to bought it. It is a Caldwell pin, has a Caldwell hallmark on the back, and we've not seen another one like that. Even my good friend Bill Topkis, who certainly probably has the best totem pin collection. I think I saw John Ort is on this Zoom as well, and there's just nobody has seen another one, and I really consider myself fortunate to be able to have that one and carry all of these things kind of forward. So a couple other things. I showed you the felt W on the board earlier. I was able to find one of those later in life. And then you've got another uncommon or obscure issue, the 1940 25th anniversary neckerchief slide, which I think we know of maybe three or four or five of them. I should say the felt W's, I think we know of four of them. The felt arrows, maybe we know of six or seven of them. So in terms of scarcity, they definitely tip the scales in that way. So one of the more recent finds that I was able to come up with, and I think the coolest thing is not just having the actual award, but to the right is a picture of the scout on Treasure Island with that award in 1924. Unfortunately, we've not been able to find any paperwork or any references as to what the actual award was for or what you had to do to earn it. But this sat in storage for probably 75 years, and I was able to add it to my collection a few years ago and took it to the lodge dinner a few years ago. And again, I think it brings up more questions than answers, but super cool kind of piece. And I think, as I show you things like this, I know a lot of times the main focus of our collection is patches, but to me, things like this maybe even raise the cool factor to a different level. So, um, as I got serious in collecting Unami, I would start buying collections like probably most of you. Sometimes somebody has a collection and you need two or three things, but they only want to they want to sell everything. So you end up with lots of extras, lots of dupes and things like that. So at that point I was like, well, I've already got a couple cool Treasure Island patches, so why not go for that as well? So when it comes to Treasure Island, we had a local legend who lived about 10 minutes from my house. This guy named Butts McMillan. As you see on there, Butts first camped at Treasure Island in 1927, was inducted into the lodge in 1928. He was the last person to keep his vigil at the Devil's Tea Table, which is exactly where Erna Goodman kept his vigil, and Butts kept his vigil in 1948. He lived to the age of 97 was still camping with his troop when he was 95. And this guy had one of those memories that I could get a picture or a patch, and not just, especially pictures, not just would he know what it was from, he'd be able to tell me who was in the picture and tell me a little story. And he became such a great, great help in early Treasure Island stuff to me. So some of the coolest things that we had, this Treasure Island Scout came with that big batch that I had that I talked about earlier. So TIS, which is a Treasure Island Scout, and if you're able to read, I tried to make that big enough. You actually had to earn this. There were different things that you had to do, and if you got 100 points, then you earn that patch. And then later, the TIS became the TIC for Treasure Island Camp. And these were worn in unique places. If you can see the picture on the right, that guy's got it on his uniform shorts. That's the one and only picture I've ever seen of it worn like that. But they were worn on swimsuits, they were worn on sweaters and sweatshirts. And again, there's a reason why probably a lot of these didn't survive, but just super cool. And I think, you know, I, I've probably had, uh, 4 TICs for every one TIS. So when you talk about the difference from the teens, and we believe the TIS cut off right around 1921 or 1922, and then transitioned to the TIC, which went into the early 30s. Um, this screen here that you're looking at, if we start with on the my right on the screen, which is the set of 5. So these were 5 different program areas, and these were activity awards that you had to earn. To the left, the first series had the Treasure Island in felt, much rarer. The ones on the right were embroidered. The 2 camp patches at the bottom, incredibly obscure and rare from the late 20s, very early 30s. We believe might have only been used for one season, so hard to find. Now, the cool thing is that I've got lots of paperwork with the scorecards. And so this one, the TP was the Campcraft award, and it told you what you had to do and how you could actually earn that. And some of them, it was more than 1 week in camp that it took to get them. So if I go back, similar, this was in addition to merit badges. So it was not very common for a scout to earn all 5 of them in one summer. So to be able to, get the complete set took a lot of time and a lot of effort. We do find little variations, but pretty cool patches. And again, having the paperwork to go with it, I think makes it pretty interesting as well. So I've had the opportunity over the years as I've picked up some of these in duplicate and things like that. And a lot of people, of course, the first thing they would do would be upgrade. But to me, a lot of what I like to do, it's not just having the patches. So many of the key patches in my collection, I know where they came from though. So you're seeing John McMillan on there. Butts McMillan, his real name was John, and because he had stamped his name on the back of all of these 3, I've decided for my main display that I would rather have them in there as opposed to the ones that are slightly better condition, just simply because they tell the story. And I believe that's a lot of where, as my collection got better and I started to pick things up, I realized that when I put displays out, that I don't just want to put patches on a table. I want to be able to tell stories. And we'll show you a little more of the storytelling as we go forward. So probably rarer than any of the patches are these pins, these buttons. And I would say Bill Topkus and I probably have the most complete collection of them. I think Bill might have 1 or 2 that I don't have, and I have 1 or 2 that he doesn't have. And so the senior patrol leaders formed the campers council, and every week, and these were real live titles that people would get elected or appointed to. Of course, the big deal was to be the mayor of Treasure Island. But you can see there's the Bureau of Highway, Bureau of Supplies, Bureau of Construction and Correction, just kind of odd, bizarre titles. I've never been able to find paperwork showing what each one of these was for. But you got to imagine that if you were the mayor of Treasure Island, and I would say that tradition, I first camped, my first summer camp at Treasure Island was in 1981. And up until that camp closed in 2008, that tradition of electing a mayor was still going on. So you can imagine a young scout beaming with pride to be elected the mayor and to be able to have the button to go along with it. And of course, we think patches didn't survive from the 20s and 30s. Certainly these buttons survived less. So again, pretty cool stuff. The other pieces on here, that top cloisonne pin for Treasure Island Camp, just like the felt letters, there was the made in the pin as well. And then there was a Treasure Island Scout Camp Honor Award. And this is a pin that was worn on the uniform. You had requirements that you had to complete. And then you could get it a second year and a third year. I don't think we've seen any bars that go beyond the third year. But it's kind of neat to see some of those in pictures. You rarely see anybody with more than just the first year honor award. I also happen to have that pin from Camp Biddle, which was a very short-term camp in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And some may know, if you're a OA history guy, that Unalactigo Lodge 8 was formed. A second lodge in Philadelphia was formed at Camp Biddle that did not last very long before it became a part of Unami. But pins, super cool as well. So I talked to you about telling stories, and Butts McMillan was actually the best storyteller up until his 90s. He was the best tour guide at Treasure Island. And Butts had shared a lot of his things with me when he was still alive, which I was so grateful for, because having those conversations with him, for him to be able to tell me, and I was able to document what he was telling me so those stories didn't get lost. He also presented me with my first felt vigil sash. I was telling a story in the dining hall at Treasure Island in the summer of either 1992 or 1994, that I had just come back from the National OA conference, and there were a couple felt sashes at the traderie that were in the auction, and I was all super excited, thinking, I was going to get one of these in the auction, and I was just blown out of the water and lost the bids. They went to someone else, and that quickly, Butts turned around to me in the dining hall and said, "Well, if you had one of those sashes, would you wear it?" And I said, "Of course, with pride." And he said, "Well, a lot of people don't know this, but I had a brother, Mickey, who also was a Vigil Honor member, and I have his sash at home. And, I have to find it, but I will call you, but when I find it, I'll give it to you." And of course, that happened to take maybe 8 more months. But anyway, I talk about the story of Butts camping. He became the 1075th member of Unami Lodge in 1928. The sash to the left, the first degree sash, was his first degree sash. The vigil sash, which you're seeing in the frame, is also the one that he's wearing in the picture. And I think the other thing that's cool, besides having his life membership card in there, his vigil certificate, which to anybody from Unami, there's another cool factor in there, and that's that it's signed by George Chapman, who was the National Vigil Honor Secretary, but also the 1916 Unami Lodge chief. I have lots more of Butts. I have all of his membership cards from his induction up to the year he died, which I believe was 2007. which is super cool, and lots of his patches that I'm able to proudly display and carry his legacy forward. Yeah, you'll see I tell the story here. He was 13 when he got inducted into the Order of the Arrow, Brotherhood or second degree in 1929 and 1948 when he kept his vigil. And there's where I talked about his vigil certificate. You can see signed by George Chapman, who was the 1916 Unami Lodge chief. And then at the bottom below the arrow, you might see some faint writing there. His sash was signed by Dr. Erna Goodman, our founder, and Butts proudly hosted Dr. Goodman at his house many, many times. And he would tell I was inducted in 1981. Dr. Goodman died in 1980, so I never had the opportunity to meet him, but hearing stories from people like Butts and so many others in my lodge, I felt like, I heard so many great stories of the time that he spent on the island. This is, I think, another super cool sash that tells a story as well. So a guy named Al Dorley was our 1955 Unami Lodge chief. And I had this sash for about 2 weeks before I even unfolded it and realized all of the things that were underneath. So he documented what year he did his ordeal, and you can see when he went to Philmont, his brotherhood, when he kept his vigil, he was Unami chief on Treasure Island staff. And this all is one frame to help tell his story. And we were talking earlier about merit badges, if you were on in the very beginning. So George Chapman, who was our 1916 lodge chief, I've been fortunate to be able to carry his legacy forward. His family, I guess the first box that came where I was really hoping on Treasure Island or Unami Lodge stuff, which it really had none of that. But at the very bottom in a sandwich bag, it had all 24 merit badges that he earned. And Johnny wasn't kidding when he said they're all 4x4 pristine squares. And just super cool. And I have his vigil sash and able to, again, tell his stories. So every year at our lodge banquet, I try to pick out a different topic or a subject and take some displays. When we had our 100th anniversary in 2015, we had a whole museum, which was probably 90% my collection. And I think, again, telling the stories was the favorite part of it for me. So I'm going to wrap up real quickly, and then hopefully we'll have some questions and answers that people we can keep the conversation going. So I think everybody does this a little differently, but I think for me, I had to make a decision along the way that if I wanted to have the best of what I was going to collect, I had to collect what I really loved and not try to collect every issue from every lodge. So I over the years I've kept my collection to Unami Lodge, Treasure Island, Felt Vigil Sashes, National OA Committee, Philadelphia, and Cradle Liberty Council. The other thing that I learned a long time ago is that it's disappointing. I put so much work into putting this collection together, and it's disappointing if it just sits in my room here and nobody gets to see it. So I take pride in and love to be invited and asked to show things or to talk about things. And I feel like, even though I'm 56 years old, but a lot of the generations that came well before me, they and their families entrusted their things with me, and it's my job to really carry their legacy forward. Never give up the hunt. I think we all would agree on that because, once in a blue moon, I do find something that I don't have, and what an exciting day that is. It's usually a very expensive day as well, but that's why I do what I do, so to be able to be in a position. And then I think the other piece that's important too is that so many people helped me throughout the years. And now it's good to be at the point in my life where I can help others, so we have an active history committee in our lodge with a young advisor in his 20s. He started out as a chairman in his teens and has really built together a good group of youth that are interested in learning about the history. So I love being able to teach them. I love being able to help them. I love, being able to share and give them things